Hello and welcome back to Monday. And Monday always means a sketch. And today we're going to be sketching Shazam because it was voted for over on Instagram. I put out a vote and said, "What did you guys want me to play? Sorry, not play. What did you want me to draw this week?" And I give you a couple choices, and everybody said Shazam. And as the news film's come out in America, but not in England yet. We're waiting for that one to come out in a few days now. I think on the 11th, and we're now sitting on the 8th. So the next few days, that film will be coming out in our cinemas in England. So I thought, without denying people over on Instagram to get something drawn, I thought we'll get doing a Shazam picture today. But we're not going to be just doing Shazam. As always, guys, I always try to make a scene and draw a scene itself. I don't generally just draw a character because I find it slightly boring over the time because a sketch is a sketch. But I like to draw a picture for the week. And so we'll be getting all my pencils out, like I always do, out of my pack with all my brush pens. And towards the end of the week, we'll be using these brush pens. So keep watching if you want to find out what I'll be doing with these brush pens towards the end of the week. Every day I'll be doing a video, as I always do, and in the holidays, guys, if you want to join me live, you can do by hitting that live chat button and saying hi in the chat, or pressing subscribe and dinging the bell so you know when I've gone live. I will try and give everybody an update over on Instagram, like I have been, what time I'll be starting, but through the holidays it may differ. Normally it's about 1 o'clock. Sometimes it can be a bit earlier, but I don't know what time we've got this week, so we're just going to be getting on with this picture now. I'm trying to focus my camera in, sorry guys, and getting on and everything. Again, guys, my name's Blut084, BLUT084. And games, and again, I'll be playing some more games tonight, this evening. Got something new for you, so don't forget to tune in for that one. And as I like to do when I'm drawing, is listen to some comics. And we've got Comics Explained. Well, I'll be getting that one on in a moment or two, playing that in the background and doing some sketching, because I don't always draw. I don't always talk when I sketch, because sometimes it takes off the detail, if you like. But anyway, let's get on with that. Let's get that going. And if you want to leave a comment, tap that button.
What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay. Wow, this is going to be an undertaking. Shazam Explained. Jeez. Dude, this character's been around for a long, long time. We did this once with the Joker, where we explained a character who had basically been around since like the dawn of the comic book industry. But this is no small thing. I mean, this is going to be this is going to be pretty tough to do. In an effective way anyway, but I think we can probably pull it off. So originally Shazam made his appearance back in Wiz Comics #2 in February of 1940, and he was created by Bill Parker and C.C. Beck. Now, conventional wisdom tells us that the creation of instead of calling him Captain Marvel, we're just going to call him Shazam, and I'll explain why once we get to the 1970s and the attempt by DC to bring his character back. But conventional wisdom tells us that the creation of Shazam was brought about due to the success of Superman. But in reality, that was the creation of a lot of characters, right? Shazam wasn't the only one who was like that. You guys got to remember, when Superman first showed up in Action Comics #1 and the superhero genre was off to the races, it was a great gold rush. Like, it's one of those, it was basically a popular trend. That's one of the things you see. A trend becomes popular, and then everybody jumps onto it, right? Like, IGN never had a reason to cover comic books until comic books became popular because of the movies. Then they had a reason to start chasing the trend. And so when you start looking at those things, it's the nature of this whole, of everything that we exist in. And so when you look at characters as a whole, by and large, Fawcett was not very smart about it. And that's one of the big things that they ran into. We'll talk about that here in a second. But nonetheless, when Shazam first showed up, it was Bill Parker, it was C.C. Beck, and it was Fawcett Publications. Now, the way this worked back then was during the 1940s and really prior to that, when we started getting into like before Action Comics #1. So basically, almost any era between the late 1920s and the late 1930s, for about that 10-year window, you had what were called pulp magazines. And pulp magazines were basically just stories that were dealing with individuals of, fantastic tales, but weren't really superheroes, which is to say they didn't have like boots and capes and powers and things like that. They didn't really exist. You had like Phantom Stranger, you had Doc Savage, different things like that, but that was really about it. When Superman came onto the scene, it brought in the comic book landscape, and then in turn, Fawcett Publications, which was largely a publisher of like news strips and pulp magazines and things like that, jumped onto the trend. And so Fawcett Publications created a comic book arm called Fawcett Comics, and then you basically had them say like, let's create Superman. And so again, that's kind of where where things get a little murky. It's because conventional wisdom is one thing, the truth is another. And so we don't really know what the actual story is, or at least I haven't been able to find it. Every story that I've looked at has basically said, the president of Fawcett said, give me Superman without Superman, thus we got Shazam. And with that being the case, he kind of went forward accordingly. And that's one of the things to bear in mind is that with Wiz Comics #2 and the introduction of Billy Batson, he was crazy popular. I mean, he outsold Superman by a huge margin. I mean, he wasn't even funny. There's a reason DC sued Fawcett Publications, and it had nothing to do with any actual concern over copyright. It had everything to do with the fact that like readers who were buying Captain Marvel could have been readers who were buying Superman. And because the two were so closely intertwined in terms of their power, the result was that DC had we essentially seemed to have a legitimate beef over what was going on with regards to the character of Shazam. But in the beginning, when Billy Batson showed up, like a lot of other characters, he was part of an anthology book. This anthology book being Wiz Comics. So it was one of a series of stories that were being published in this one particular book. But Shazam was the standout star. And so what ended up happening here is that by the following year, he got his own solo series, which again was hugely popular. And it lasted some time that really went up to like around 1951, 1952. And the reason why I say that is for several reasons. In reality, one of the things we've talked about over the years, and we've talked about the collapse of the comic book industry, then the near collapse of the industry following the end of World War II. Superheroes existed before before the United States became involved in World War II, but the popularity of superheroes didn't actually pick up until World War II. And the reason why was because you were talking about characters, unless you were Superman or Batman, you were talking about characters who were basically using their fantastic powers to fight alongside the Allied powers against the Axis powers. And so it worked for the purpose that it served. The result was that by the time World War II ended, people were tired of conflict. They didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. And so the result was that you ended up seeing comic book characters begin to drop off. But in the solo series, a lot of things were basically beginning to come underway. You had Bill Parker, C.C. Beck, who created Shazam himself, and then you had other characters who started popping up. You had Captain Marvel Jr., Freddie Freeman, who was created by France Herron and Mac McAvoy, and then you had Mary Marvel, who was created by Otto Bender. Now, Otto Bender coming on was a result of the fact that Bill Parker had been drafted into the military. And so really, this was like Otto Bender's first foray into comic books when he created Mary Marvel. But the fact remains, for Captain Marvel Adventures, this solo series ran not a huge amount of time, but it ran for a pretty good clip. And this meant that as the title continued on and as it became more popular, it became more of a threat to Superman. And so what ended up happening here was that in 1948, there was really what's considered to be a landmark case of the comic book industry, National Comics Publications versus Fawcett Publications. Now, National Comics, again, was one of two companies that would go on to become DC Comics. National and All-American. Fawcett Publications, of course, was by itself. The issue with this for Fawcett Publications was that despite the fact that they were creating other comic books outside of Shazam, he was their standout star. It was that and pretty much nothing else. And while the roster had been built over the years, it all centered around Shazam. So if they lost him, they lost everybody that came with him. So like Adam from Otto Bender and Mary Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr. and Dr. Savannah and all that kind of stuff. And so as a result of this, in 1948, the case went to trial, and you ended up having the presiding judge who basically said, well, DC screwed up. The National Allied screwed up. When they initially went through and published Superman, that they let the copyright lapse on several instances of his character, specifically the newspaper strips. And this basically allowed Fawcett to essentially come in and create what was effectively a knockoff of Superman and be well within their rights to do so. DC responded by filing the correct copyright and then in turn appealed the decision. This went to 1951 and 1952, which went to Judge Billings' hand. And Judge Billings' hand passed down the ruling and saying that in and of himself, Shazam is not necessarily an infringement on the character of Superman, but the things that he was able to do was basically the infringement, which is actually a legitimate case. And so as a result of this, DC in turn won the ruling to some degree. I mean, Fawcett was going to appeal, but the result was that they were essentially drained of money. I mean, the character had dropped off in sales. So they basically had a loss of sales going for them. They were losing money left and right. Superheroes were becoming less popular. There was no real way for them to revitalize interest in Shazam, and so they essentially settled. And what this did is it led to a decision that was made between both companies where Shazam would no longer be printed by Fawcett. They would still essentially own the character, but they couldn't publish any stories about him, so they really couldn't do anything with it. And so the result was that following that, Shazam disappeared off the shelves of comics for quite some time, and then in turn, that went to Superman becoming the character that we all know, kind of setting the stage and opening the field for him to become widely popular under like Mort Weisinger and people like that. And so this goes directly into DC trying to revive it. Now, this was a byproduct of an effort for DC to like bring back superheroes, right? We talked about this over the years in different videos that we've done, that following the near collapse of the industry after World War II, the lack of superheroes, and the rise of popularity of the horror and science fiction genre, that in 1956, with DC Showcase #4, DC editor Julie Schwartz brought in Barry Allen, and that re-sparked interest in superheroes by blending science fiction themes with traditional superhero roles. The idea behind this was that over the years, really in 1967, Marvel Comics had already created the character of Captain Marvel, and this is where things tend to confuse people. At the original outset, the first character to ever use the name Captain Marvel was Billy Batson under Fawcett, but by the time the character had been brought back, copyright for the name had basically lapsed. And so what this meant was that when DC in 1973 sought to bring back the character of Billy Batson, they couldn't use the name Captain Marvel on the cover because Marvel Comics had claimed it. And so that's when things really began to confuse people. So as it stands right now, at the time this video is being written and forevermore, Marvel Comics will own the name Captain Marvel in terms of the cover form for the character. In terms of the first person to ever actually use the name, that's Billy Batson. But because of the fact that the character really couldn't be used anymore by DC, they simply rechristened him as being the character Shazam. Simply because of the fact that that's the word he shouted in order to gain his powers. And that was the interesting thing behind all this, is because when you look at the original origin of Billy back in the 1940s, he was basically a kid who was on tough times, and he was taken into a subway system by a guy wearing a trench coat, and he was brought before an old man who said, if you say this word Shazam, then in turn you will gain powers, and you can go forward as a hero, and so on and so forth. But that's what made Billy so popular, is because Billy was basically a kid who worked for the Wiz radio station and would essentially break the fourth wall by addressing the reader and saying, hey guys, here's what here's what Captain Marvel did today, and then tell the whole story of what it was that happened to go on, and so on and so forth. But again, going into 1973 and the attempt by DC to revitalize the character, there were a lot of moving pieces at work here. The first was that you had Carmine Infantino, who was really one of the big pushers of DC during like the 60s and 70s and somewhat during the 80s. But then you also had like the creation of the multiverse. In 1961, we got the Flash of Two Worlds and the advent of the multiverse proper. And so when DC went back and said, okay, let's bring back Shazam, or let's bring back Billy Batson, and we'll simply call him Captain Marvel, they immediately got a cease and desist letter from Marvel Comics. And they said, stop using that name. And so what this meant was that from that point going forward, Billy Batson could be called Captain Marvel within the confines of the comic, but the name couldn't actually be put on the cover. So therefore, we got Shazam. Now, with this being the case, because of the fact that the 1960s, the late 1950s and the mid 1960s was essentially just like a reshuffling of the DC landscape, creating new origin stories. The idea was to bring back Billy Batson and then kind of remove him from like the Fawcett Comics era to keep some of those things intact, but then in turn kind of rework the character. And so what we ended up getting here was DC sitting down and saying, okay, the subcaption, the original Captain Marvel can't fit. We'll just call him Shazam, and then it'll be considered the world's mightiest mortal, and we'll start that with issue number 15. But going forward from there, what we actually got were essentially 2-in-1s with regards to these comic books. You got basically reprints of the old Fawcett Comics stories, and then you got new stories featuring the character of Shazam. And this was designed for a very specific purpose. For people who were coming into the character of Shazam, by and large, they didn't know who he was. Billy Batson, he'd been gone for 20 years by the time his character showed up. So people who were going in and reading comics, for the most part, had no clue who he was. And so we basically got Dennis O'Neil, who was writing the comics, and we got essentially backup features, these old Fawcett publication stories alongside news stories, so that people could basically get caught up on a lot of the supporting characters. The other question that people had is, they said, how is it that this character has basically been gone for 20 years and nobody knew where he went to? And so in a story, really in a combination of stories, we ended up getting this explanation that somewhere along the line, Dr. Sivana had faced off against Shazam and the Captain Marvel family, and then froze them in suspended animation. And what this did is it allowed DC to bring the character back. The problem with this was that Superman was still wildly popular. They didn't want to oversaturate the market with too many Superman-esque characters. And so what this meant was that DC invoked the multiverse, and where you had like Earth 1, which was the main superheroes in DC that fought alongside Barry Allen, where you had Earth 2, which is where you had like Jay Garrick, the Flash, and so on and so forth, we got Earth S. And what Earth S did is it basically allowed DC to bring back the character of Shazam and then throw him into his own universe and say everything he does here is totally self-contained and doesn't impact anything else in the DC universe. He did cross over. Occasionally he would cross over with other characters, but for the most part, that was really all there was to it. This whole idea with Shazam trying to bring him back lasted about 34 issues. It didn't last very long. And even then, issue number 35 was really more of like a backup feature that was published in the world's finest comics. Now, the reason why the revival of Shazam didn't work out and only ran for about 34 or 35 issues was because people didn't like the idea of having a character like that in a totally self-contained universe. By this point in time, a shared universe existed. Batman, Superman, Shazam meet for the first time in Superman number 76. They team up, they stop a jewelry heist on a cruise ship, and then now like we know that Gotham City and Metropolis exist on the same Earth. The characters start crossing over, so on and so forth. Because that was part and parcel to the landscape at the time, what was being given here with Shazam was essentially an anomaly, something that people didn't want to see. In addition to this, you're talking about a return to a character who is written in isolation almost 13 years after the Justice League had been formed. Nobody wanted to see this. And so one of the last-ditch efforts that was made by DC to kind of revitalize this character came with E. Nelson Bridwell, Alan Weiss, and Joe Rubenstein, as well as Don Newton, which was to kind of like create more tangible and grounded stories as opposed to more fantastic tales of science fiction themes and stuff like that. But again, didn't really work out. And so the result of this was that by the time you ended up getting into the later issues of World's Finest and so on and so forth, the whole thing had basically just been like dropped off. Now, following that, like what DC had at the time was essentially leftover material. They had stories that just weren't going to be able to be published because of the fact that this solo series had been canceled. And so over the course of really like, September to October of 1982, what we ended up getting were like these little leftover holdover stories published in like Adventure Comics, World's Finest, different things like that, just sort of letting it drop off. Now, following this and going into 1986, really like the post-crisis landscape, under Roy Thomas, DC tried to rework the character of Shazam yet again. The problem with this was that it was fraught with nothing but just editorial problems and ultimately didn't really see the light of day. The idea behind this came out of a 1986 miniseries that was called Legends. And Legends was really a way for Keith Giffen and JMD Mateus to kind of springboard like new characters and stories. And so what they did is they reintroduced Shazam as part of the Legends series. That way it would kind of equate new readers with who his character was, and then in turn that would spin off into its own solo series that was supposed to be called Shazam: The New Beginning. Now this was written by Roy Thomas through a host of other artists. The problem with this was that it didn't work out because there were just a whole bunch of editorial problems. It was really Roy Thomas bumping heads with DC pretty consistently, and so the result was that ultimately it never really came to fruition. We never really saw anything come out of it. And so for the most part, between 1986 running up until about 1989, there were efforts that were made by guys like John Byrne and so on and so forth to try to like bring Shazam back, but it just never really worked that well. And nothing ever really came out of it. And so the reality of this was that from the time that a series was canceled pre-crisis up until about 1991, he'd vanished yet again. Now in 1991, this saw Jerry Ordway come on by basically writing a series called The Power of Shazam. Now in reality, The Power of Shazam, well at least the way it was originally done, is it was a graphic novel. And the graphic novel would be thrown out there by DC in an effort to test reception, and if people liked it, go into a solo series. And in truth, like the original graphic novel was hugely popular. Oh, people loved it because what this did is it basically took a look at the character of Shazam from the time he was first introduced, running all the way up to his cancellation in 1952, 1953, his return into the mid-1970s, his eventual cancellation again, and then an attempt to return him in 1986, looked at that whole thing and basically said, what's essential here? And what it did is it wiped out everything that basically came post-crisis. So like Shazam, The New Beginning was essentially gone. The stories were written by John Byrne in Action Comics. Those were basically gone. Instead, what the story did is it took the character of Billy all the way back to his roots, to the old Fawcett Publications stories, and then kind of like redid his origin, but maintain the themes that would keep it updated for the modern reader. Now, because of the fact that the graphic novel was so popular, this led to the actual solo series itself, which ran for about 47 issues, but 46 of them were written by Jerry Ordway. Now, for most people out there who are familiar with the character of Shazam, this is usually where they started. And so that's one of the reasons why there are so many fans out there for his character who love this era, who love like this run, this 46 issue run by Jerry Ordway, because for them, it's the definitive run that established him. The problem with this was that, again, DC was really kind of experiencing a tumultuous time with their landscape after Crisis on Infinite Earths, because where that story was designed to kind of clear the landscape of the multiverse and to sort of reset everything, to essentially reboot, there were still themes that were kind of left hanging. And so you went into like 1993, 1994, 1995, you go into like, 0 Hour Crisis in Time, you go into the mid-2000s where you have Infinite Crisis, and then you have Final Crisis, and you have like all these stories that were worked on in an effort to kind of like rework the DC landscape. Shazam was kind of caught in the middle of it all. And so what this meant was that for his character, following the conclusion of the Power of Shazam's story, instead of DC canceling him, what they actually did is they threw him on a series of different publications. For example, he showed up in JSA during the events of 52, with regards to Infinite Crisis. You ended up having Mary Marvel, who basically lost her powers. Then you had Captain Marvel Jr., who lost his powers, all as a result of the Days of Vengeance, when the original Shazam, I guess really the Wizard Shazam, the one who gave them all their powers, was killed by the Spectre. This led to Billy Batson basically leaving his role as being Shazam Shazam the superhero, and then going to be the Wizard Shazam on the Rock of Eternity, which left the role of the Earth superhero Shazam open, which they tried to fill with Captain Marvel Jr. It was all these different efforts to kind of like try to rework the Shazam mythos. The issue with this was that for the most part, not enough had really been done to warrant reworking his character. You're talking about a 46-issue monthly series, so 46 months passed. So, around 4 years passed, and Shazam is just now really being introduced to like the readership out there. But because of the fact that the sales were slumping a little bit, and because DC was trying to rework things, they essentially reworked them unnecessarily. And so what this basically meant was that people were a little more confused, and really the stories were a little worse for wear following this whole reshuffling and so on and so forth. And so what this basically meant was that going from the time that Power of Shazam ended with issue number 47, so we're talking 1999, running all the way up until 2011, Shazam never had a solo series. It was really just him and other people, other members of the Marvel family, who were featured in like different books. It was one of these scenarios where his character kind of bounced around, but it also gave people the ability to see him in ways they wouldn't normally be able to see him. If his solo book wasn't selling that well, that meant that nobody was really reading it. And if nobody was really reading it, then it meant that most people weren't really familiar with what his character was about, what was going on. And if that was the case, then put him on JSA, a book that's selling better, written by Jeff Johns, and then give people, an intro to his character. It was kind of a way to sort of go back and just say, okay, let's try this again, but in a different way. Now, one of the other cool things that again came out of this, the Trial of Shazam, was this 12-issue maxi series. It was basically saying, okay, let's rework the character of Captain Marvel. Let's rework the character of Captain Marvel Jr. Let's rework the character of Mary Marvel. And so what this did is it actually led to Freddie Freeman trying to prove himself worthy of taking over the character of Shazam following the death of the Wizard Shazam, and Billy Batson taking over the Wizard of Shazam's role. So again, it was kind of a way to sort of rework them, to get people interested in seeing them in a different way. But at the end of the day, it just didn't quite stick. It was cool, but it just didn't quite stick that well. And so this goes into 2011 with a line-wide DC reboot. Now, in reality, the 2011 reboot of DC, of course, as most people know by now, was line-wide, which basically meant that it was essentially DC rebooting everything. Basically saying like it all starts all over again. But for the character of Shazam, he was reworked in its entirety. But this is one of those scenarios where fans were really kind of split the fan base. For people who...
I'm just going to pause that there and show you what I've done so far, guys. So hopefully you saw the different stages that I took to get to here for so far. Where I did the basic skeleton shape and worked off that. And I don't think it's looking too bad. We've got a little bit of muscle structure, but I'm not going to put loads of muscle structure, because what I've seen of other pictures of Shazam, he doesn't have a huge like muscle structure or like rippling unless he's in battle. Well, he's not in battle in this picture. He's actually turning into or from with each either way, because he is Billy Batson, as you probably heard in the background of the explained Shazam. We're going to be listening to some more of that in a minute, but because I want to carry on drawing Billy. But hopefully you saw what the different stages I took there. If you didn't, definitely, if you are watching, rewind and check it out. Each stage will help you how I do at each stage. And if you just want to read in each stage, maybe I can do one here for Billy, and we'll get a little bit sorted here. I'm gonna, like I said, it's going to be a scene, so I'm going to try and put Shazam's full face there, and maybe a little bit of Billy's face there as well, same as you can see on the thumbnail. I'm trying to draw that picture basically, but in my style, if you like. We've got a little bit of refining details and little bits of extra we need to put on Shazam, but Billy is just wearing a normal polo shirt, and I think we'll get that drawn. So let's get Comics Explained carried on, and hopefully you're enjoying, guys. Don't forget to leave a like if you are, and find out some more about Shazam.
Were new, or who got into Shazam after the events of the Power of Shazam storylines, and after really his character was kind of reworked before New 52, for them it didn't really matter. It was kind of like, hey, like that works for me. The issue with this was that for longtime fans, they felt a little bit betrayed. And the reason why was because when you went and you looked at like Keith Giffen and James DeMatteis' runs, when you looked at the runs of like Jerry Ordway, different things had taken place. One of the major scenarios that had come along with this character was that where you looked at old school comics from like the 40s, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was this idea that Billy Batson would become Shazam, and then Shazam was his own total personality. He was a whole other person. It was like Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk. But when you got into like later storytellings that were done into the 1990s and really the early to mid 2000s, it was one of these things where like Billy Batson becomes Shazam, but Billy Batson's still there. He still kind of has like this childlike innocence about him, which is what a lot of people love. He was kind of like the best of both worlds. It really kind of split the fan base, and that's an important thing for you guys to be aware of. Is that when it comes to characters like Shazam, he does not have the biggest fan base in the world, but those who are fans of him are hardcore. They are intense fans of him. And again, I mean, with a character that's been around this long, we kind of have to leave some stuff out. But the fact remains that when it came to this whole thing, you had like a kind of character redesign. You had these small little things that went on. But one of the most notable instances of Shazam in the New 52 era is he didn't have a solo series. And the reality of this was because there was just really no room for it. DC was publishing like a ton of comic books, and the character of Shazam was a gamble. The reality of this is that there's no guarantee his character will sell. And so it was a very big publication risk, given the amount of money that was already being put forward, the existing line of comics, to throw Shazam into his own book and see what would happen. And so what this meant was that with issue number 7 of Justice League, New 52 Justice League, running all the way up until issue number 21, he received backup. He was basically a backup feature, meaning that he was at the end of the book. Now this was designed to basically kind of rework him in his entirety, but also bring back everything that fans were familiar with. So Mary Marvel came back, and Freddie Freeman came back, and then there were like introductions of new characters that kind of expanded the Shazam lineup and different things along those lines. But it was basically, it served the purpose of kind of like returning him to familiarity, but also sort of making him new. The problem with this was that where, the backup features ended, and then he in turn joined the Justice League, fought alongside the Justice League into things like Trinity War, Forever Evil, and Darkseid War, and so on and so forth. His powers were changed up, but then Rebirth happened and he vanished, and nobody knows where he's been ever since. We saw him once in Hellblazer Rebirth, but he was there when Wonder Woman was talking to him for a minute or two and just said, well, we'll let Constantine do his own thing, and we don't know where he's been ever since. We have no idea what he's doing. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people who are looking at the upcoming solo series right now kind of have this take where they say, we don't know how to view this. We don't know if what Jeff Johns is going to do is continue what was done in the New 52 reboot, or if he's going to rework the character in his entirety, and we're going to get a return to the power of Shazam stories. One half of the fan base wants to return to the way things used to be, and then you want fans who want to return, who basically want a whole new take on the character. We won't know until the book drops. But again, this is a character that's been around for a long, long time. Being able to cover him in his entirety, that's a multi-part series. I mean, you're talking about like a 7-part series on the history of his character if you want to cover everything. But that's one of the crazy things, is that over the years, the powers of Shazam have also sort of been reworked, in a large number of ways. In the old stories, if Billy said the word Shazam, under any circumstance, he would change. In later stories, that began to shift away because then you started running into problems. Well, what happens if Billy, like, if he's walking down the road and somebody runs up on him with a sign that says Shazam, and then he says it, does he turn into Shazam? Billy accidentally says Shazam or something along those lines. But again, in order to tell like practical stories, that essentially went away. Originally, it was based off the idea that each letter stood for a particular character that he gained his powers from. So S was the wisdom of Solomon, H was the strength of Hercules, A was the stamina of Atlas, Z was the power of Zeus, A was the courage of Achilles, and then M for the speed of Mercury. And that was really it. The characters that he's gotten his powers have changed over time, especially when you get into like Darkseid War, is a whole new host of gods. But by and large, it always stays the same. The basis of his powers almost never ever change. Wisdom, strength, stamina, raw power, courage, and speed. Those are kind of universal across the board. The powers of Superman. They never really shift. But again, his character is also sort of intertwined with magic. And that was one of the big differences between Shazam and Superman proper. And Superman was basically just like, what would happen if a guy was an alien and he was exposed to a yellow sun? And then he was just like really, really strong and powerful. And like, that's it. It's basically the mutation of his cells that give him his abilities. Billy gets his powers from magic. And it's one of the reasons why whenever you see him go in like an all-out knockdown, drag-out brawl with Superman, that he can usually win because Superman has a weakness to magic. So it's one of those strange little situations that goes on there. But it's kind of a cool situation. Nonetheless, hopefully this video gets you guys prepped enough to understand what's going on with this character. Again, there's a lot of history to cover there and not enough to do it all in a reasonable amount of time. But hopefully it works for you guys. And hopefully it gets you guys pretty prepped for his character. But with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
Peace indeed. We'll listen to some more Shazam, I think. There should be another straight after this. If not, I'll find one and we'll get one going. If you have enjoyed this, guys, again, that's Comics Explained. Go check them out. They're over on YouTube.
What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so really, like, Shazam has finally come back in DC Comics. And I know a lot of people are just like, oh my God, thank God. Because it's one of those, like, presences that was hugely missed. Like, you can't launch DC Rebirth, some 2 years ago, whatever it was it launched, and then not have Shazam and then just kind of leave it that way. I mean, he was non-existent. There was no indication he was there outside of an appearance from, like, Hellblazer Rebirth. Like, that was it. And so the question everybody's been asking here is, where has Billy Batson been? And what has Billy Batson been doing? Now, a little bit of backstory here. This is actually kind of important. And the reason why is because Jeff Johns just sort of picks up. And it works for what it is, but it does require a little bit of explanation. So, when DC rebooted back in 2011 with New 52, Shazam did not receive a solo series. Instead, he was a backup feature in the Justice League. And this is a lot of this because he hadn't really been able to hold a solo book for some time. But it was also a way to kind of keep people, to introduce people to his character in what was considered to be one of the best-selling books that DC had at the time. It was covered between Justice League issues 9 and 21 as backup features, but it wasn't consistent, right? Like, you would go 9, 10, 11, 12, and then there would be nothing for 13 or 14. And then you would go into 15, and there'd be nothing for 16 or 17, and then you go into, 18, 19, 20, 21. And what the New 52 Shazam book did is it laid the groundwork for Dr. Sivana, who was probably, I would consider to be the arch nemesis of Billy Batson, even if Black Adam's more popular. And then it basically said, okay, there's Billy Batson. It laid his character out. There was the what would become the Shazam family, and then you had kind of the origin of how he got his powers, and then you had him fight Black Adam, and then it was done, and that was it. And that's all you really had. So it was really more like a teaser than anything else. It was really like a story arc, like a singular story arc spread over the course of what amounted to like 10 or really about 12 or 13 parts, and then that was it. And so what this does is immediately jump into it. And so this kind of picks up with the Captain Marvel family, the Shazam family already existing. Now the funny thing about this is that when it comes to Shazam, one of the big things that people didn't like about Billy's character when the New 52 first launched is that he was dark and cynical. He was just a mean little kid. And the whole idea behind this, in terms of how Jeff Johns had written him, is that he was a kid who had been bounced from foster home to foster home. And so he had a very, very, very hard life. When he finally was placed in the Vasquez home, that's when he ran into like Freddie Freeman and Mary and all those characters who would go on to become the Shazam family. But at the time, he didn't mesh well with them. It wasn't until he was taken before the Wizard Shazam, given his powers, and then sent back to Earth that he began to gain a new understanding for the significance of family. With them being his supporting characters, especially going into the fight of Black Adam, that's when they all began to grow closer. And it wasn't until Justice League number 21 and the final part of the story that Billy realized he needed allies, and then he bestowed a portion of his power onto the rest of the adopted kids, and they became the Shazam family. And so what this does is pick up a year after that, or 9 months after that, but it might as well be a year because of the amount of time passed. But it picks up after that point in time. So again, it's a little murky in terms of when this takes place chronologically. It says it takes place today, but what that basically argues, what it basically says is everything between the time that Shazam first, gained his powers and the time that the Shazam family was born up till now has only been a year in DC Comics. Take it for what it's worth. You can kind of run with it if you want to. But the fact remains that we basically end up picking up in the Museum of American Revolution. And this is kind of cool because when Billy became a superhero, then he became the Billy Batson that fans had known and recognized from back in the 90s and even before then when they used to read his character. And so when you get in here, there's kind of like goofing off. Okay, it looks like they're having like the most fun. Like it looks fun. It's kind of funny here because Freddie Freeman was always kind of like the cut up of the group. Well, he was always a kid who was just kind of like, goofy and messing around, like the devil may care kind of attitude. Whereas Billy was more of like the middle ground. He's like the Mario of the group, right? Like the balanced character, even if Luigi can't jump higher in Mario 2, which despite what Video Game Donkey says, is not the greatest game of all time. Not even close. But the fact remains here that in this instance, he's just kind of the character that cuts up and has a good time. And so when this whole thing goes on, these guys basically break into the museum in order to rob, these old artifacts and then presumably sell them on the black market or something like that. It's probably the worst decision that a person could have made because they basically run into a place that currently contains a whole bunch of teenagers who shout the word Shazam and basically become Superman. And so they're fighting an army of Superman, and it was a terrible decision. They were not prepared. That's basically what happens with these guys. Billy Batson's the first one to call it. He pops up and bam, they're all there. They start cleaning the house. I mean, that's really the way it is. They literally start cleaning house. Now, this is designed to kind of showcase how they function together. That's the nature of this thing. For those of you guys who are new to comic books, it's one of the things that writers will hit on when they're bringing characters back, when they're introducing characters for the first time, like new X-Men, or when they're when they're coming through and saying, okay, here's a new roster of X-Men. Then like you'll get a series of story arcs that showcase their individual personalities and then how they mesh as a team and how those individual personalities conflict. And that'll take 18 issues or something along those lines to flesh out, 3 story arcs. But with something like this, you're basically bringing the Shazam family back. And so it kind of picks up as if you never left off. And it works because what this does is it basically gives the old Shazam fans kind of just like, hey guys, so we're continuing on with business as usual. And they don't feel like they really missed out on anything. But for the new fans, they get an idea of what the Shazam family is about, while at the same time wanting to go back and see older things. It makes them nostalgic for an age of comics they hadn't read. And so it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool way to make it work. Of course, this whole skirmish is over quick, fast, and in a hurry. And here's the funny thing. They can't think up a name for themselves. They can't think up a name for their group. And it's kind of funny because I'll be honest, man, like you got to have a cool name. You cannot become a superhero team and then call yourself anything. Like you can't be like, we're the people who do things. Like you can't call yourself that. But you have to have like a cool name. Honestly, I don't know. Okay, here's a question for you guys. If you guys had to think up a name for the Shazam family that's not called the Shazam family, what would you call them? Like what would the name be? Like I'm kind of curious, like Thundercats. Oh, like I don't know what I would call it. I think it'd be kind of cool. Anyway, so they're just kind of like goofing off, trying to figure out what their name's going to be. The cops are like, let's just chalk it up to Superman, and they basically end up leaving. And so again, like from there, they transition back home. Now again, not a whole lot is happening here in terms of like fast-paced action, razzle dazzle. None of that stuff's really happening. Kind of getting us reacquainted with the characters, getting us reacquainted with the team. Remember, this is issue number 1, so it's not really designed to have a whole lot of things happening. And one of the things that for those of you guys who are new, one of the things that existing comic book fans will tell you is that when it comes to Jeff Johns, it's always a slow burn. Jeff Johns will never like have this great big huge grandiose event that'll happen over the span of like 6 issues. It'll take like 12 or 18 or like 24 or sometimes even 50 some odd issues for the event to reach its conclusion and to have this huge finality and climax. He's very Jonathan Hickman in that regard. Nonetheless, with them getting back home, it's very much just like kids meshing together and having a good time. And that's kind of the cool thing is this is starkly different from how it was when Billy first showed up. And that's the great thing about this is again for older fans, they're just kind of continuing on. For new fans, it's something new. But for older fans, it's kind of a reward. It's a payoff for due diligence. It's a payoff for sticking around, saying, yes, I read the new 2 run in the back, in the pages of Justice League, and yes, I follow the later Justice League stories where Shazam was part of the team, and during Darkseid War and all that kind of stuff, and so on and so forth. After Trinity War, and Forever Evil and whatnot. Yes, I follow all that kind of stuff. But like I've been a fan ever since, and like yes, we're picking back up again, and yes, I remember all this. It's like a little bit of nostalgia for a series of stories they haven't read in over 3 years. And so when you jump into this whole thing, they're just sort of, like, hey, let's go do stuff. There's some stuff I want to show you guys. So it's like they all race from the table. The parents are like, where are you guys going? And like, we all got to do homework, which is no answer any kid ever gave any parent ever. And so like right off the bat, they know there's something's wrong because like no kid wants to do homework. But nonetheless, once they actually get into the Rock of Eternity, this is kind of an important thing here. What they've done is they've kind of turned the Rock of Eternity into their base of operations / trophy room. Now they call themselves the actual Shazam family, and that's really kind of what they are at the moment. But this is a little more important than it seems to be. And the reason why is because they're taking these small moments to celebrate things with each other. They're taking these small moments to talk about things that they've done and sort of celebrating the history of their group as a whole. Because with them all having these sort of superhero powers, all of which were bestowed by Billy, it's unified them in a way that they really didn't think was possible when they first met. They have a common theme here. They fight as a superhero team. They've experienced loss. These are the things that are important in terms of how they look at the world. Not only that, one thing to also bear in mind is the Rock of Eternity is empty now, and it has been for some time. The wizard Shazam, or really the wizard Mammergan, who gave Billy Batson his powers, he died almost immediately after that happened. And so Billy was just kind of left to his own devices with no real guidance, no real mentorship. That's really where you saw his character grow when it came to the Justice League comics, because he looked to Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, the trinity of superheroes, and even others as major influences in how he should act and function. It was very reminiscent of the old school Justice League Unlimited cartoon when Shazam showed up for the first time and then fought Superman. And then was basically at the end was like, you guys aren't heroes. You guys are people masquerading as heroes, but you're not heroes. You've forgotten what it means to be a hero, and then walks away, which was awesome. Can we all just agree the fight between Shazam and Superman in Justice League Unlimited was beast? Oh man, I'll watch that as soon as I get done with it. Dude, he thrashed Superman. I'm sorry if I'm so excited, people. But what also happens here is Eugene has actually kind of been mapping through the Rock of Eternity. He's been going through and saying, okay, look, there's really nobody here anymore, but there's all this information that's here. There's all these things that are here, these old rooms that are impossible to access, or these hallways that go nowhere, different things like that. So we're going to map the whole place, and we're going to figure out what's going on. Somewhere along the line, there was a wall as part of the Rock of Eternity, and it's gone now. and it leads down to this place that they call the station. Now, where the station, what it leads to, we don't know. We don't know if it leads to like alternate realities, other dimensions. We're not sure, but it does allow for Jeff Johns to kind of set the stage of exploration for the Shazam family as they go through and start seeing where these different trains go to. But it is kind of a cool thing because what we end up being told is that they basically travel to a place called the Magic Lands, and that's when we start to get this explanation here. The Magic Lands, as are explained here, seem to basically be places where magic reigns supreme in some form or fashion. And that's kind of important here. And the reason why is because if you go and you look at the number of places that seem to exist here in the Magic Lands, there's 7 of them. And the reason why that matters is because originally, when New 52 first launched, we got the history of the Rock of Eternity and so on, there were 7 wizards and sorceresses who governed magic, who basically existed to protect magic. Somewhere along the line, Black Adam went crazy and killed all but the wizard that gave Billy his powers, but they seem to have probably operated out of these places or hailed from these places. And so it's Billy discovering his own lineage in a lot of different ways. Now, this is all stuff that would have been taught to him had the wizard remained alive, but he's discovering all these things. And so by discovering all these things, what this does is it gives him his own personal history. Now, from there, we switch back over to the family of the Vasquez. Now, of course, there's a couple things going on here. You got Freddie Freeman, who's just kind of like, hey, so like, let's pull these levers and find out where these trains go. Exactly what I would do. Oh, dude, I would definitely do that. I'd be like, hey, man, so like, we probably shouldn't pull these levers. It's like, well, I mean, how else are we going to know where they go? I would be reckless. I'd be like, let's go on the adventure. But once they yank it, literally, like, it seems to activate everything. And when that happens, we end up having a knock on the door of Billy Batson's house. The Vasquez answer, and it's basically Billy Batson's father, who says he's here to see his son. Now, one of the things you guys will notice is that the father of Billy Batson looks exactly like Billy when he turns into Shazam. Now, the reason for that was established back during the Power of Shazam stories by Jerry Ordway. And one of the things that you learn is that Billy Batson, when he turns into Shazam, he actually turns into what he imagined his father to look like. And that's exactly how he looks. So it's kind of tragic and it's kind of sad, but it is cool. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
We are so excited about the future contemporaries, a wonderful group of emerging philanthropists.
Gonna find some Shazam more stuff, guys, because we're getting into some else, I think.
Basically get caught up.
So a little bit of a story from them. Alternate versions of
With the
Shazam.
release of one of the best DC movies yet, we're here to have a quick look at the alternate versions of Shazam that are floating around in the multiverse. Quick history lesson though, the character was originally called Captain Marvel, first appearing in Whiz Comics #2 in 1940, published by Fawcett Comics. The adventures of Captain Marvel would continue to be published until 1953. When Fawcett was hit by a lawsuit from DC Comics, stating that Shazam was just a copy of their Superman character. In 1972, Billy Batson and his supporting cast would be reintroduced by DC after they licensed the character from Fawcett Comics. His name would officially be changed from Captain Marvel to Shazam during his New 52 revival. Jump forward to 2019, and Shazam is now starring in a major motion picture that is so good. But enough of the boring history. Let's jump into those different versions of Shazam. Captain Thunder, the very first alternate version of Shazam. They didn't seem to be trying hard with this one since he's basically the same character, just a slightly different name and symbol on his chest. The hero met and fought Superman after the Monster League of Evil tricked them into fighting. He would gain his power when he shouted, "Thunder!" And he gained all of his abilities from Tornado, Hair, Yunkas, Nature, Diamond, Eagle, and Ram, which is a pretty lame list. But it was the 70s. What do you expect? Captain Thunder from 1982. Up until this point, Shazam and the Marvel family all resided on Earth S, separating them from the main DC continuity. In 1982, DC almost moved the character over to the main DC universe. In the main DC universe, he would be known as Willie Fawcett, a young African American who could change into Captain Thunder by speaking the name of Shazam. This proposal was never actually used, however, and Shazam would not appear in the main canon for some time. Shazam! Monster Society of Evil, 1989. More of a reboot than an actual alternate version, this miniseries would reinvent certain aspects of the character, such as making Billy Batson and Captain Marvel separate personas, while also keeping the core idea of what Captain Marvel was up to this point. These ideas would feed over into other alternate versions of the characters later on. Captain Marvel from JLX in 1996. During the greatest crossover event ever conceived, we're introduced to Billy Marvel. Using the word Kree, Billy is transformed into Captain Marvel, an alien-enhanced warrior who fights for the Judgment League Avengers. He shows up for about 3 panels, but just look at that costume, look at that color scheme. All right, I'm done. Captain Marvel from Kingdom Come in 1996. In this far-flung future, superheroes have actually become more of a scourge than protectors of good. It's up to Superman to come out of retirement and put back together the members of the old Justice League and straighten them out. But in this world, they are more frightened of superheroes than inspired by them. Young Billy Batson has decided to not use his powers for decades. He has grown into the exact image of Shazam, though, allowing some to believe that he is really Captain Marvel instead. He is brainwashed by Lex Luthor to be a deterrent against Superman's more militant attitude towards the Superman community. Billy remains the hero that he always was, though. Captain Marvel from Elseworlds Finest in 1998. Now, in this world, Captain Marvel is African American, and he served on the Justice Society of America and the Justice League. His secret identity and the basis for his powers are unknown. Captain Marvel from Superman Distant Fires, 1998. Actually, the same version of Captain Marvel, except this world is ravaged by nuclear war. When a depowered Superman comes riding into their village on a giant cat, he reunites with Wonder Woman and the two fall in love. Billy Batson has become infatuated with her, though, and his jealousy pushes him to become an evil version of Captain Marvel. Also, Superman rides a giant cat. You should read this book. Captain Marvel, Dark Knight Strikes Again, 2001. Now, in Frank Miller's dark alternate future, we get an aged Captain Marvel. Lex Luthor has kidnapped Mary Marvel and blackmailed the hero into working for him. The difference between this character and what we learn is that Captain Marvel has lived on even after Billy Batson actually died 8 years prior. This means that the Captain Marvel persona is actually separate from Billy Batson in Frank Miller's world, much like previous versions. Captain Marvel from Earth 5 in 2007. This version mirrors the original Captain Marvel, except that Billy Batson is a reporter for the Wiz Media, and he's once again a separate entity from Captain Marvel. This version would go on to reappear in the Multiversity comic event from Grant Morrison. Justice League Generation Lost, 2010. This series featured a female version of Captain Marvel who wielded twin swords for some reason. Her civilian name was Sahar Shazim, and no other information has ever been known about her. Captain Thunder from Flashpoint 2011. Possibly a nod to the past or because coming up with new character names is hard, but Captain Thunder would once again appear during the Flashpoint event. In this alternate world, Captain Thunder has all of the same powers as the regular universe Shazam. However, the power is split between 6 children who must speak the word together to combine and become the hero Captain Thunder. This idea would be carried over into the New 52 version of Shazam, with the children becoming the foster siblings of Billy Batson and even gaining their own powers during the Shazam backups in the Justice League comic books. Once they gained their powers, they would then become the new version of the Shazam family. Mazash. This evil alternate version of the hero would appear in the Forever Evil arc. Alexander Luthor from Earth 3 speaks the magic word and transforms into Mazash. With his powers, he is able to kill and take the powers of other superheroes. He is, however, killed by the main universe Lex Luthor. Also, I'm sorry, but the Shazam name backwards is a dumb name for this character. I'm just saying, he's super powerful. Why couldn't he be like Evil Shazam? Just makes it easier. And there you have it, the alternate versions of Shazam. Now, let me know in the comments down below what other heroes maybe you want us to cover their alternate versions of. We have kind of a lot of them coming up in the Avengers that we could very easily cover. But what do you think about the hero of Shazam? One of my favorite superheroes that just doesn't get the limelight. Shazam's a great hero. But I want to know your opinions in the comments down below, and you can also subscribe to the channel to keep up to date on your favorite comic book news and information and books. Shazam is an interesting character with a rather crazy history involving him being a part of the DC universe. Today we're going to be covering an older storyline in which Superman and Shazam actually met. Now, this is before the New 52 renaming of him, so he is actually known as Captain Marvel at this time, and Shazam is the actual old wizard, okay? There's also no kids. This is like an earlier version of Shazam where it's just Billy Batson. If you're wondering where you are, well, this is Comic Story, and we do the complete story series where we take some of your favorite pop culture icons and we break down their stories into digestible bites so that we can read them dramatically back to you and give you like an audiobook motion comic drama kind of a thing. I hope you guys enjoy. At the Rock of Eternity, the great wizard Shazam sits on his throne thinking. They have come to a crossroad. Fate rises up from the dirt like the rock that builds the mountain. He can see time's horizon as easily as a sailor that sees the sun dip into the surface of the ocean. They are entering the second age of great heroes. It is before the coming of the Amazon, the Speedster, and the Space Knight. As time passed, the world begins to know Superman and how he protects the metropolis. But in Fawcett City, another hero is about to be known. Across the sky, a pilot begins to lose control of his plane, and it begins to head straight into the busy street. The frantic people begin to run for cover just before that plane hits, except instead of crashing, the plane stops. The people slowly begin to open up their eyes, and a voice tells them, "Don't worry, everything is under control." They look back and they see him, Captain Marvel. Shazam watches Captain Marvel from his throne, for Captain Marvel is his disciple, his herald, his champion. When Captain Marvel says the wizard's name, Shazam, the powers of the gods themselves run through his veins. This is the first of many steps that Captain Marvel will take on this journey, but he is in a battle with fate, and fate is an emotionless creature, as well as an inexhaustible foe. Meanwhile, over in Metropolis, a group of thieves begin to steal the ancient artifacts from Russia in a museum. The leader of the group tells the others that they need to be careful. The artifacts they have before them are the key to the ascension. The powers below demand it. And that's when Superman flies in holding the lookout, stating, "I really don't like the sound of that." The thieves reach into their pockets, all beginning to pull out staves that couldn't possibly fit there. And Superman watches, telling them, "Oh boy." Swirling blue energy begins to gather before Superman, and from it, a giant creature appears. It lunges at Superman, knocking him to the ground, but Superman's heat vision easily begins to push it back. Superman swings, hitting the monster, but the creature begins to turn to smoke. He looks around and sees the thieves are gone, and there's a coin at his feet. He picks it up and he sighs. Magic. The next morning over at Fawcett City, Captain Marvel finds himself fighting against a pair of giant robots trying to destroy the Fawcett City Solar Center construction site. The robots begin to kick down some buildings, and Captain Marvel thinks to himself, a few months ago, he would have loved to have seen some fire-breathing robots up close. But strangely enough, it seems to have lost its appeal now that he's here. One of the robots tries to step on Captain Marvel, so he grabs and rips that leg off, throwing it into the head of another. He then turns to fly over to the other robot, but the fallen one grabs a fuel truck, throwing it into the air. Captain Marvel grabs that truck, spinning it around, throwing it back down, blowing it up, and the robot. He then spins back to the walking robot, shooting through it, ripping out its wiring from the inside out. Once these robots are taken care of, Dr. Bruce Gordon, the Solar Center's chief scientific advisor, steps out to personally thank Captain Marvel for his services. But along with his thanks, he asks if it would be possible to keep the wreckage so that they could figure out why they may have been attacked. Captain Marvel laughs, "Ha! I usually mount the big ones in my den." And Bruce asks, "Really?" Captain Marvel flies up, telling him, "No, it was a joke, but if it's all right with the authorities, you can keep them both." Later that night in the abandoned subway, Billy Batson and his friend Scott read the paper, and Scott says, "Mount them in my den? You're such a dork." Billy shouts, "No way, it was funny, and get a load of me in the newspaper smashing those robots." The two laugh, and as Scott looks at Billy's makeshift tent, he tells Billy that he really should consider coming up and staying with them. He yells no, he's not going back up, just to be put into another foster home, and then he holds up the paper stating, "Besides, all I have to do is say one word and I'm fine." As he looks at the paper, he sees an article about how the Metropolis Museum was robbed of its Russian artifacts. And he comes up with a great idea. Elsewhere, Dr. Thaddeus Savannah of Savannah Industries, and his vice president, David Tan, ask why he isn't dead yet. What Gordon was working on was only supposed to be a PR project, destined to fail, not actually work. Looks like they just need to learn more about this Captain Marvel. Back with Billy, he heads over to the McKean History Museum, and he notices a group of thieves breaking in. He tells himself that he knew it. They're here for the old Russian stuff. Well, Shazam! A bolt of lightning strikes down in the dark alleyway, and as that smoke clears, Billy stands there as Captain Marvel. He heads inside, telling the thieves that he's pretty sure they're only allowed to take things from the gift shop. Even then, he'd have to pay for it. As the men turn around, they show themselves to be the same men that Superman fought back in Metropolis. But this time, they conjure up a green energy, and two goopy monsters rise out of the floor. Billy laughs, stating, "Aha, let's see what these guys are made of." 2 seconds later, Billy is knocked out of the museum into the street. As he gets up, a voice calls out asking if he's okay, because it looks like he could use some help. He looks up and he sees Superman floating before him. Billy jumps to his feet shouting, "Wow, you're Superman! Oh man, it's such an honor to meet you, and holy moly, you're Superman!" Superman laughs, telling him, "Yeah, that's me. I was just..." But before he could finish, the two creatures burst through the doors of the museum, and Superman says that it looks like he's got his hands full here. Billy nervously laughs, telling him that it's nothing he can't handle, but you know what? I could always use some help. The two begin to take out one of the creatures, separating them. But as Superman throws one to the ground, the monster gets back up, hitting him with a magical energy blast. His upper body begins to get covered in crystal. So Billy yells for him, "Hey, hang on, Superman!" He grabs the monster, throwing it into another one, getting ready to hit Superman, giving him some time to help. Superman falls back to the ground, so Billy pulls his arm back, telling him, "Don't move. I don't want to hurt you." He focuses and punches the crystal, shattering it, freeing Superman without hitting him. And he asks if he's okay. Just then, one of the monsters jumps on the two of them. So Superman tells him he's all right, and he blows out his Arctic breath, freezing the monster in place. Billy looks at the creature, stating, "Holy moly!" But before they can deal with the monster, the other begins to fire a second magical blast. Billy pushes Superman out of the way, taking the hit. But Billy deflects the magical energy, and he calls out, "Wait for it." Once he's close, he grabs the monster, throwing it into the air, and then Superman freezes it, letting it shatter when it hits the ground. Billy shouts, laughing, "I wish I had that ability." And Superman tells him that he seems to be getting by just fine. He shrugged off that blast like it wasn't even there. And Billy tells him, "Yeah, it was a crystalline force beam. It's actually how malice trolls excrete their waste." Superman looks at the broken pieces of the monster and he asks, "You fought these before?" And Billy tells him, "No, I just know things. Wisdom of Solomon." Afterwards, the two of them fly off to Mount Everest, where Billy asks Superman what it's like to grow up with powers. Superman tells him all about the things he used to do when he was younger, and as he mentions his father, Superman trails off. He says that he's sorry, but he really doesn't talk about himself like this with anyone. He's made it a point to keep his personal life and his hero life separate. Can't really go on stating who he specifically is. Billy tells him, "Yeah, I get it. I just think it kind of stinks." Meanwhile, back at Fawcett City, down in the streets, the thieves from before gather around a man that is tied up and bound, as the leader tells everyone that they're about to begin the ritual. From the powers below, from the dark depths beneath us, grant your disciples the gifts. Join us on earth in the flesh of this vessel. Come to us, Satan. I am Belial. Come to us, Beelzebub, Asmodeus, Cretus. Give this man your gifts. Now, Timothy, claim your birthright. Say the name. Say it. The man, Timothy, looks around panicked and quietly says, "Sabak." Just then the ground cracks and a dark red energy rushes out of the ritual site into the sky. Across the city at the Solar Center construction site, the sounds of destruction can be heard and the sky begins to turn dark. One of the workers begins to shout, "Oh God!" And as a part of Bruce's face turns blue, he says, "No, it's not about God at all." Back at Mount Everest, Superman hears the sounds of chaos and he tells Billy that their talk's going to have to wait. There's something going on back at Fawcett City and they have to go now. As the eclipsed light shines, both Sabbac and Eclipso have risen. But to know more about Eclipso, we may have to look into the past, when nature created what was known as the Spirit of Vengeance. It was birthed to maintain order in the universe and administer retribution to punish the wicked. However, unattached from a human host, the spirit lacked a sense of morality. Unable to destroy its creation, the universe confined the spirit into 1,000 black diamonds, one of which made its way to the remote Pacific island of Diablo. There, Bruce found himself fighting against the diamond's power, but in the end, he lived and claimed that diamond. Now he is the one who possesses the gemstone of the dark spirit of Calypso, or rather, it possesses him. Back in the current time, though, Billy and Superman arrive back at the city to find Sabak destroying everything in his path. Billy tells him that he can feel it. There's a large amount of magic here. Sabak shouts for everyone that they should flee or succumb to the power that burns throughout him. Billy and Superman swoop down, picking Sabak up, and Billy asks, "Do bad guys always talk like this?" Sabak breaks free from the hero's grasp and turns back, breathing fire in their faces, flying off. Superman dusts himself off, stating, "So apparently he can breathe fire. Gonna have to watch out for that one." Meanwhile, back at the construction site, Eclipso places the small black diamond into one of the solar panels, stating that it's time for him to get to the workers. For today is a very dark day, and where others see darkness, I see light. A dark light beam shoots up into the sky, and as the world darkens, Billy stops moving and shouts for Superman not to move. Just then, the dark rays of light pierce through the sky and down into the people of Earth, turning them into Eclipso's thralls. As this happens, back over at Dr. Thaddeus' office, he watches. David says that their agent Spec has returned. Thaddeus tells Spec that he is impressed. How did he manage to avoid the fire and brimstone falling out of the skies? Spec says that he's always been good at walking between the raindrops. He just has to give the information that was requested. Would he care to know where Captain Marvel lives? And how about when he's most vulnerable? Over at the construction site, Calypso looks around, stating that this was much easier than he thought. Now the real work can begin. Just then, the solar panel with the black diamond is destroyed, and Calypso shouts, asking, "What trickery is this?" Superman tosses a piece of the solar panel to the side, stating, "No trick."
No trick at all. As we hit an hour on today's drawing, I think we'll call it a day because we've got the main sketch all done and complete. I've put pretty much every line that I'll want to put in there. Maybe a little bit of refining, but we've got the construction lines complete. This is now ready for inking, which will be the next stage, which is going to be tomorrow. So if you have liked doing this, guys, enjoying watching this, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, guys, if you have enjoyed the Shazam and you want to know where I'm getting that from, or if you want to listen to more will be listened to tomorrow on the Comics Explained and also Comics Historian, maybe somebody else, whoever knows, we'll find out tomorrow because tomorrow we'll be inking this. Tune in tomorrow, guys, and I'll see you. Click the links that will appear. My name's Blut084, BLUT084, Art and Games. Later on, I will be playing another game and find out what that is over on Instagram. Same name, different place. Thanks for watching and goodbye.